how do you know you're kind of getting somewhere? Oh, doesn't sound like it.
Is it on now?
There you go.
Hey, there you go. I think there's two. I sort of feel like I've got two answers. There is one, which is, do we know any organisation that's doing good work? I was having this conversation with someone in the break. It's pretty much always trying to find money, trying to find people. We might be trying to find like physical space, for example. There's a kind of scarcity to it, or it feels as though there's a scarcity to it. And I think if you've got a plan for the next year and you've got income that you can use to project into the next year, that there is a kind of linear way of looking at it. However, let's say, for example, that even if we were looking ahead to like the next year or two and we didn't know exactly how we were going to get to where we're going, we're quite lucky in that we can report on stories and we can go, okay, a great example is Tara's project, right? So the dentist surgery, did we support that from the beginning? Did we lend it a lot of visibility and did it succeed? Yes. So we see that as something that we can do. If we can promote other people's good work, for us, that's a win. Now, we might have lost a couple of members that week, unrelated, obviously, but, we might have lost a couple of members that week. And so for us, okay, so the line, the funding line went down, but actually, like, did we produce some social good? Yes. And I think that's something that, all of the people that are sat here in this room are doing something where we see progress that isn't just financial. Thing is that every single person sat in this room also needs the financial support, whether that's members or grant fundraising or that kind of stuff. So if you're looking at it purely from like a fundraising perspective, which because I'm the fundraiser at the Cable, I pretty much am all the time, then yeah, it's really, you kind of have to look at it from a linear perspective, but there's such a bigger thing that we're doing. And I think that is part of moving away from the way that things are right now, right? Is we don't want to be thinking about, are we just always growing? Is the line always going up? What we want to be saying is are we sustainable long term? And that might be you get to a certain point and then you flatline because you've got enough money and that's your operating budget and you're all good there. And are we still able to produce the social results that we're producing?
Great. Thank you. Does anyone else want to Emma, do you want to say anything on how you kind of know you're getting somewhere?
How do I know I'm getting somewhere? How do we know we're getting somewhere? I think like it used to be much harder in spaces like this where you feel like you're shouting at a lot of people and not a lot of people are nodding and they're like, you're going to go away. And then more and more often I go into rooms like this where people are like nodding in agreement and going, yeah, this sounds great. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'm saying exactly the same thing as I've said for like the last 20 years. So, oh, great. Anyway, so, that's kind of different. It feels like, you may be like, I don't know if you're a songwriter and you wrote a song 20 years ago and then suddenly it becomes number one now and you're like, yes, I knew one day it was going to be good. That's kind of what it feels like. So, yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question.
So anyone else on this side got any thoughts on that, Ben?
We've had events here where 3 people have come and that has been a day where we've really felt like we're not making progress. And it's so easy to give up in those moments. But what's that thing where it's like, no matter like how big the step, even if it's just one step, keep moving forward. And so for me, it feels like in those moments, you just have to take one tiny step and just keep going. And I think it's a bit like with the dentistry thing. It's like if you can be ready to do something when the time is right for you to do it, then you're kind of doing your job. And that is the progress that it takes.
Yeah, I think it's quite a linear frame on a sort of non-linear assumption in a way. This idea of progress is quite difficult. And, Ben, you've been very kind of like humble about your project. I think actually what you're doing is absolutely amazing. And it's about connection and it's about relationships. And I think it's not about whether or not we're kind of making progress, but are we kind of living and working in a way that aligns with our values and is building the kind of world of our longing, really? And I think if we kind of come back to that, come back to relationships, not just with each other as humans, but as Therese was talking about as well, the more than human world as well, then I think that we know that we're moving in the right way.
how I measure progress is usually by meeting one like-minded person, because I usually have to filter out like 50 before I meet you or anyone here, you know, and it's so exhausting that by the time the journey of that is so exhausting that by the time you meet that one person, you know that is a lifelong relationship you're going to have, because your hearts connect over something that matters to both of you, and which is usually a community matter. So for me, and what I attach to that is also the word authentic. So I can't define authentic. Sometimes I think you can't learn it. Sometimes I think you can't teach it. Sometimes I think you've got to be born with it, but I don't know which one's right. But yeah, it's just meeting authentic people with the same end goal as you. Makes the journey, that is success in itself, and then you arrive at something, you know, at an outcome that is productive. And also influence and change in the workplace. Sometimes it takes a long time, and it's very exhausting. And I sometimes like go to the well-being room and I'm like, you know, just like you know, taking a moment to myself. But sometimes change takes like 3-4 years, and then you'll see something in their policy and you're like, yeah, that was me years ago. And it hurts that it takes that long, but it means that there's a legacy of something you've left behind, that it could be one little thing, but it matters a big deal. And also progress is when people don't believe in me as well, and then I use that to motivate me to show them what's up. And also, yeah, I'm looking for £600 funding, guys, for the next campaign. So let's talk. Yeah, progress, yeah? I'm taking the opportunity.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to kind of talk on that question? Or it's good. Nice opportunistic move there. I like that. No, go for it. I think I'm going to sort of pose a different open question as well, if that's right, which is around, I guess, you know, there's a massive richness and diversity to all the different priorities and areas of focus that have been presented tonight. There's also a lot of commonality around, you know, striving to make a better place, to look at future-proofing various things, to looking at kind of democracy and just lives really in the city. So they're all kind of separate but aligned, and I just wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on how collectively this can be sort of greater than some of its parts, because I think that's kind of the sort of the spirit of getting everyone together today. You know, there's a lot of there is a lot of commonality, there's a lot of common challenges, there's a lot of opportunities to kind of share as well, but what would be those big moves that would mean this can be a kind of a groundswell for something that's bigger than all of it separately? So I think there was a question in there. Does anyone have a go at answering it?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at it. When I was listening to everybody, it was really quite fascinating, really quite learning experience. We approach issues through different points of entry. So for example, for us, it's land, but it's never just about land. It's also about policy, it's about community, it's about housing. But our entry point is land, and who owns it and how we get it back and how it's used. So we might have different entry points, but there are kind of commonalities and overlaps. We have to talk about local businesses, places where communities can gather, and we're constantly talking about that. But I think the way we approach it is, without land, you can't do anything. Everything happens somewhere. This is a piece of land that's owned by somebody, leased to somebody, occupied by somebody. And the current land system, I wouldn't say it's broken. I think that's the wrong way. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to. In the capitalist system, the few profit, land is a commodity, it's bought and sold, property values increase, that's supposed to be a good thing. And it's actually a good thing that it's too expensive. So it's not a broken system, it's actually the normal system. And our challenge is to replace it with something else, even if it's piece by piece. And the next thing I want to say is that the other thing I've been hearing, which all of you know, sometimes these issues seem very overwhelming. You're talking about progress, and I would say years, sometimes decades. It's something I study a lot. But the bad news is what we are doing is very tough. The good news is there are lots of people in this room, in Bristol, in UK, in the world. There are thousands of people doing this. So I think having some sort of critical mass, which is one of the points, this is a challenge, because I mean, it sounds good coming together, but we are human beings. We have temperaments. We have different ways of doing things. So finding that common ground in very strategic, that's the word I like to use, strategic ways is really important. So you agree on some things, but you agree to disagree on other things. Doesn't mean you agree on everything. So those are two things I just want to say. One is what are our entry points, what grounds us, to that issue. And second, how do we strategically come together on certain issues while also acknowledging our differences? Great.
Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, it kind of links in with what you've just said. So actually, for me, it's I would say we have different priorities, but everything comes back to people. So that is, I would add that to that being another priority, like housing and healthcare. And if you think through a lens of being people-centered, everything comes into that. And yeah, that. Sorry, repeat the question to me, please.
It's around how. The microphone.
No. Yes.
How we're greater than some of the parts, I guess, because it's all there's different points or different lenses.
Yeah.
Look at society, I guess, in its broader sense. How does this collectively?
Well, I think the practice of citizens' assemblies, things like that, where different agencies come together in a space where citizens are making those decisions, and there's like participatory decision making. We recently did that for the CRF Community Resilience Fund in the council, where communities were in that space making the decisions, and we weren't. At that time, I worked at the council, and that. It was good for me to be in a space where we're not making the decisions and the residents were. So things like that, I think we need to do more of that, and just looking at that through a lens of being people-centered. And also another thing is being active allies. Like everyone else just needs to be an active ally. And I don't know if this fits with the question, but I would say when you're being an ally, do the hard work yourself, because sometimes the load is left for people like us, and then that slows down our progress. So yeah, be an active ally and join in the mission with everyone else. Even if you think it doesn't tick your box, eventually it will if we're all people-centered. So yeah, I think it just goes back to being people-centered for me. Not giving up.
Danny, is there anything, I was just thinking around the, I guess, sort of structures you're talking about in terms of how you bring people together around a common kind of, reflecting your language back at you, but what are the sort of practical ways you could sort of achieve that multiplier effect?
I think it depends upon what resources you actually have and where your skills lie as an individual, as a group, as an organisation. So look at the work that Stacey's doing, look at the work that Emma's doing in those kind of community spaces. What they do is they amplify and magnify and, multiply the community good like I've never seen anyone else do. It's absolutely incredible because they know what resources they have. They know how best to place them and to make them available and when to give people discounts and to encourage people to step into, into spaces and stuff. And that requires that level of skill. But as a principle, I'd say just remembering that we're all creative. And actually, when we activate our imaginations and we let people dream and invite them into visioning and ask them questions like, well, what if? Then all of a sudden we open up and think about what might be possible, even if it's not realistic. It's about kind of actually imagining it before we're able to kind of create it. And this idea that about around manifestos, I think there's enough room for millions of manifestos. What's it about? It's about manifesting something, right? So we all want to kind of know what our values are. We all want to know what it is we want to create and how we're going to do it. So why not put it down and articulate it and share it with the world? It's a great idea. I think that for us, it's that creativity. It's about creating spaces where people can have real connection, and it's about making it as inclusive and as accessible as you possibly can. And we don't always get it right. It's about owning our mistakes, being humble and learning from others and inviting others in and just going, this is what we're doing. Can you help? And can we join you? And approaching it in that way.
Yeah, just to, I guess, build on some of that, I think the difference has to be held is what I would kind of go back to in terms of this notion of sort of pluralistic approaches. Each one of us probably has very trusted communities and networks that actually have taken years to kind of build. And that's sort of really central to any of the successes that maybe any of us have sort of had. And that may not be easy to replace and can be also very fragile because it can be taken down quite quickly by certain powers. So in terms of actually building bridges across things and to kind of think through a more transversal kind of approach, I think you sort of need to have many of the campfires going with many of the elders sitting around it and others coming around. But then to speak up to power, because essentially that's what you want to be doing, to shift the dynamic so that we're not handing to a generation some of the same issues, then we need to actually be more agile and smarter in a sense. You know, why has it taken one could ask, why has it taken this long for all of us to come into the room? Who else could be in here? What's the difference? What other persons of color could be here sitting around as well? What's the diversity of the approaches that we want to be celebrating in Bristol? And for that type of meta work to kind of happen, that requires resourcing of certain kinds. It requires a resourcing for any one of us to step out from our everyday and into a space where we can think through strategically some of those alliances. So I guess I'm speaking also from a person who has the privilege of having a job at the moment with a kind of a remit I see my responsibility in that space. So the question is, you know, how to engage with each other in ways then that feel legitimate and authentic and valuable to both sides, and look closely at what those power positions can be sometimes as well. So I think that in kind of thinking through an expanded scholarship, let's say, or the role of scholars or academics or people who have full-time jobs in society who are doing some of this work. I mean, that would be one of the questions I would ask back to this forum. How do you use us, you know, in this respect, yeah, to a better end? Because I'm measured on impact all of the time, in a very brutal, commodified way. Has your work had impact in the real world and changed hearts and changed minds? And how have you measured that? And are you getting in books to show us? And I mean, I'm sure, Assam, you are dealing with the same. And the neoliberal system in academia is squeezing more and more of that. So there's less space for actually, so this, you know, we need to be in alignment with each other, because therefore there might be possibilities of supporting structures that enable a more long-term practice to emerge, which gives flavor to, I think, what is a very distinctive approach of creative practices that are happening in Bristol at this moment in time, which are happening in other cities, but there's something very distinctive, I think, happening here.
Does anyone else want to talk on that question? Thank you. Please.
I think also just a feeling of like we don't need to reinvent the wheel necessarily. One of the things that, you know, we've seen a lot, as well as like factionalism and lots of people sort of splitting off, is also these creations of like big alliances of groups that actually don't have any kind of real mandate to do anything specific. It's just like, oh, we all feel the same, let's make a new group. And it's like, we've all got groups and we've all got our lane that we're in, and like you said, that we've built, you know, for a long time, and it's taken a lot of effort and stuff. And I think you know, so for example, you've just said I need 600 quid for, you know, for my next campaign, and I hope that someone here might, you know, if you run a crowdfunder, might chip in 20 quid, and like that's great. You don't necessarily need to become, you know, a dental advocate, but like the person who's already an expert in dental advocacy could do with 20 quid, you know, and we can all kind of contribute to each other's work that we're already doing without having to create new work for ourselves to do. So I think that is also something really important, is like, if there's something you care about, there is definitely someone out there already doing it, and maybe just like, you know, send them an email saying they're doing a good job and they might have a like nicer day. Even that's nice, you know.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to pose another question now, which is around I'm going to come on to the role of the council, right? So they've had a name check in quite a few people's, you know, talks today around the role and around the changing nature of the role that's coming up and what that new relationship is going to look like. So I guess sort of, does anyone have any thought on who has the ear of the council, or how that's best going to be achieved in the new era? Ben's probably got a view. I think several people might have a view, so don't hold back, but keep it punchy.
I'm going to be really nice about the council, actually. So I wanted to come back on the thing. I had no idea that you were responsible for, or partly responsible for, that community participatory budgeting thing, because I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And the council has done some really interesting experiments around kind of participatory budgeting and community and that kind of citizen panels and stuff. The thing that I think has been really problematic, I went along to the closing party of that thing, and there were like 200 residents sitting around, and they were so excited about what they'd participated in. It was such a brilliant thing. And I was talking to this guy, and he was like, I used to go to my work, and then I used to go home, and that was my whole life. I had nothing in between at all. There was no kind of way in which I was participating in civic life in any way. And then this thing came along, and it reconnected me to my place, and it meant something to me that is immeasurable, right? And then it got to the end of the evening, and then the council went, thanks very much, bye. and it was just like, you can't just leave it there. And the thing about participatory budgeting and kind of civic involvement is it's got to be something that once you've done it, you're free to kind of do it with other people. And it's like, I really think that it should be something that we can kind of spread throughout Bristol, rather than everyone has a go at it like jury service and then it ends. So that's one thing I want to say about the council. We've had some really interesting conversations with the council about this idea of the citizens assembly or the citizens panel or whatever you want to call it, and it's really heartening. I feel like a corner is being turned. What I'm not necessarily seeing is loads of transparency and loads of kind of commitment to actually seeing it work, and for actually resources to be put into it. And I think the last thing I'd say is, if you get it wrong, you lose a whole generation of Bristolians. You know what I mean? Like if you don't do this right, then people will lose faith in the idea that citizens have got something to say about how their city works. So let's get it right.
Yeah, so I just had a thought on that, because this program Urban Host that I mentioned, which was focusing on promoting and provoking alternatives to how we live in cities, that's the strapline. We kind of think about, to exercise like one's creative muscle or civic muscle, in a sense, you kind of need to get into it. Sometimes meetings are not always easy to contribute things to. So maybe one way, and I'm just thinking out loud, is actually not to put this huge pressure on just the citizens' assembly, but actually to say this is one of a number of these practices that actually are engaging us all to think about this. And here's this, it operates at this level, and this one, and again, so that I think when we go back to this idea of what is the success and the safety network and the ecology of this that we're developing, I think that's probably what is exciting about Bristol, in a sense. It's the size and scale of the city is also quite interesting, because sometimes these things get harder when you move up beyond a city that's a million and 1.5 million. So actually our scale is to our advantage here. So just kind of riffing off that might be one way to think through this together, actually.
I just wanted to say I feel really sorry for a lot of officers who have probably had their hearts and souls crushed over decades of austerity, and I think they would really stand to benefit from one of your visioning workshops and be able to have some space to think about the future in a really optimistic and free way. But I think, like, jokes aside, I think we don't allow for space for failure, and we don't allow for our public sector to get things wrong for right reasons, and where they do get them wrong, they tend to then get them wrong catastrophically, because they're so scared to fail that by the time they admit to failure, the kind of snowball effect of how that failure has been able to perpetuate over time and being masks becomes these huge sort of public scandals. So I think we need to find ways where our local participatory democracy also it allows the people that then are entrusted with the roles to then enact that democracy are trusted to do the jobs according to their areas of expertise. Within local authorities, there's usually people who hold huge amounts of expertise that tend to have the least amount of say about the subject area where they have the huge amount of knowledge. And then over time, you know, that then depletes our public services of really skilled people and leaves us with people who are, you know, at best, you know, disheartened, you know, holding on to the hope that something will change. So I think, you know, part of this process of changing how we make decisions has to be about how we treat our civil servants, and how we value the people that are the people that we trust to carry out the visions that we want to manifest together.
Great. Thank you. Has anyone else got anything else to say about council? I thought there'd be quite a.
I have a lot to say.
No. Okay, fine. Don't open that can of worms as well. Okay, fine. You can, of course you can.
I'd just say that the role of the council is it's very contextual with our times right now, with the budget cuts, with the change in system as well. But essentially, I feel like traditionally and hopefully going forward, their role will be as stewards, essentially, of Bristol's assets and sort of civic life. But that needs more accountability, rooted in participatory democracy and engagement. But they need to be braver because we need systemic change. And they need to facilitate that change, not get in the way of it.
Thank you. Really good summary. I think it was several of you kind of were interesting, sort of looking backwards to kind of give clues to what was going forwards, I guess, in terms of the rise of sort of council involvement in something, and then their budget went. And then I think it was Stacey, it was you was talking about that sort of transfer. And I guess that the relationship between kind of society and the council is obviously it's always in a state of change, but it's in that key point now. So I wanted to ask a pretty, possibly slightly cheesy practical question, but I guess if any of you got any thoughts on, you know, any of the other group speakers that you've heard about tonight, or most of you probably already knew about, but is there kind of an ask and an offer that you'd like to make to anyone sat here now? I know what you're going to ask. 600 quid, right?
Hi, I love the cable. You know I love you guys so much. So can we do like a fundraiser via you, or is that for? I know, that's why I'm asking. I follow you closely. Yeah, let's get the mic. Yeah, let's make this happen because it's on record now. Yeah, come on, guys. I'm being intentional.
Also, it's on record of me saying like yes before asking my colleagues with whom I am in a
It's
co-op.
done. It's done. People power. It's done.
I still run these things by my colleagues.
No.
But you've heard it here first. Yes, I've said yes.
So what's the offer?
My offer is, I've written this down: more disruption, more people power, more social change, challenging unjust systems and authorities more. I can't say more because when we get this potential funding, I'm going to invite everyone. Please follow me on the socials. It's going to be visual impact. There's going to be politics. It's going to be political. There's going to be VIP guests. That in itself is political. It's going to be amazing, guys. It's environmental. It's community related. It's health and well-being. It's everything. It's where you want to be. We just need the money. And I'm doing this in my spare time, voluntary. We're a small group, we're 4 people, but that's exactly how the dental thing started. No one believed in it. Let's ride off the back of that, please. And yeah, I love you guys.
Ben, so
Can I just ask, is this £600 for your root canal surgery? Because I'm not paying for that.
No, it's not. No. I don't make money out of things.
does anyone else want to sort of articulate and ask an offer to anyone else? Yeah, Stacey.
I guess, yeah, I just wanted to say the ask and the offer is the same thing. So use the community spaces that we do have. And it's because, you know, it's like when people hear about a library being closed, they instinctively think, oh, that's not good. Maybe haven't used one in a long time. And it's so with the community spaces where you live or where you work, make sure that we're actually using them. if you're meetings, events, social things, if you work somewhere and your work hires meeting spaces, don't get them to hire Burgess Salmon, or get them to hire community spaces in neighborhoods. So we have to use them basically, and the offer is there for them to be used.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to take up? Okay. Oh yeah, go on.
Just thinking about that 600 quid. So there's like 33 people in this space right now. That's under 20 quid each. So you've got my 20 quid. Just saying. But actually, coming back to the Bristol Commons, actually, we do have an invitation rather than an ask. So I've already said that our next community event is on the 27th of April. These events are to kind of come together to kind of understand what it actually means to be commoning together, to experience some of that work in practice. But there are also 3 working groups that are kind of supporting the ongoing development of the Bristol Commons, and anybody can join one. One looks at strategy and membership. The other one looks at mapping the commons and resources that we can share. And the other one is about the storytelling of this movement and of commoning, and communicating that. And so if that is appealing to you, the meetings all are free to attend, food is provided, and there's an onboarding process to support people. So it's just that invitation. If you fancy coming along, then get involved. There's lots of ways to do so.
Thank you. And just to say, there's been a lot of events and upcoming kind of activities that have been mentioned tonight. So Catherine's put together a really good few slides at the end with sort of QR codes for some of those, and they will be going around in a blog or something later in the week or next week. Fine, we should take a question. Would you like to pick a question, Catherine?
Speakers that focus on events and conversations, how do you plan to translate this into change on the ground? I see a collaboration between yourself and Tara Moran's activism as necessary. There we go. Is that answering the question?
Does anyone want to give an answer to that question? So around, I guess the implication being events and conversations are the beginning of something. How do you plan to translate that into action on the ground? You don't necessarily have to agree with the question, but...
Well, I can say something about that in that I think the cable, obviously, with the media work that we do, we facilitate conversations. That's kind of the whole point of it. And then we do also run events. And that is exactly, I mean, I was saying a minute ago, don't reinvent the wheel by sort of creating new groups, but those are actually the alliances that I think work, in that we get together with people like you guys to, make sure that what you are already doing on the ground is getting some visibility. And then when we do events, we quite often do them in community spaces. We've held things at Trinity before, and we obviously engage with lots of different community groups around the city who have that expertise, who are doing the things on the ground. So it's always trying to, I think, engage with the people who are already doing that stuff, and then making sure that people know about them and can contribute to what they're doing. So I think there is a space for those people who are facilitating conversations, as long as you're pointing people in the direction of other people who are doing that groundwork as well.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one question quickly. I want very kind of 3-word answers or something from people. So I'm kind of channeling Emma and her backcasting things. I think it's a really interesting approach. So, imagine this. It is 2040, shall we say. It is, Bristol is a thriving, just climate, socially valuable, thriving place. So in many ways we've kind of got there. What one thing did we do or stop doing in 2024 that made that happen? And was just pass the mic along, please.
So every citizen did something voluntarily in their free time in their community. Everybody in Bristol.
I think people sought out organisations like ours, like Sparks, and maybe bought all their clothes from the thrift shop at Sparks instead of H&M, that sort of thing.
so complicated trying to kind of hone the kind of messiness down to one thing. And I think I kind of like slightly resist that kind of way of thinking sometimes, but I understand why you're doing it. And I guess probably mine, and I imagine probably what a lot of people's come back to is just, instead of seeing ourselves as consumers, see ourselves as citizens and people taking action where they have power instead of feeling powerless, understanding the influence that we all have in our little circles, and that's change, even if it is a tiny thing in that tiny circle.
I'd like there to be a law that says that you can't build a new building on an old building unless the new building stands the test of time and is up for to be built for as long as the old building was there. Does that make sense? So you can't come along and build something new if it's crap. I don't know if you can write that into a policy.
Yeah. Let's do it. It's a manifesto coming.
There's a grand alliance between the groups here and the Commons project. I know there's some overlap, and they take on one or two issues and work on it for the next 10 years.
Thank you.
I was going to say collaboration. So intentional collaboration, and I would say pressure. Keep applying pressure, because systems are becoming more and more unjust. So apply pressure, especially at times of change, such as us having a new committee system going on, is the right time to apply pressure and say, we're watching, let's work. Instead of saying, we're watching you, get it right, we can say, let's work together. Let's go, go with that way. Let's work together. We can influence a better future. And thirdly, act as if time is running out. I think if we do that, you arrive quicker. So if we all act like that, we arrive quicker at the result we want. And I think we're all kind of tired, it is exhausting, all of this. So, and also maybe like some free spa treatments along the way, help to, keep us going longer to 2024. Yeah.
I must apologise in advance for literally making myself cringe as I say this, but because of what we've been through in the forum, I would say it's about stopping talking and starting listening. Sorry about that. But the reason why I say that is just because there are so many people that we've seen throughout our experience in the forum that just never listen to. They've got no way of feeding in, and no one ever listens to them. And I think it's a root of a lot of problems that we've got in our place.
I think what makes a difference to get to that place in 2040 is realizing our collective power and understanding that we have this potential, we have this energy, whether it's, we start taking care in where we spend our money, where we place our time, what we give our attention to, and how we frame what we're doing, so that we're actually framing it in that kind of positive, constructive, collaborative frame.
Vibrant repair communities across all of Bristol's neighbourhoods, making and mending.
Great. I think we're at an end. We've kind of run out of time. I figure we could probably carry on for a bit longer, but I think we'll draw it there. So I'm going to give it a brief go at wrapping up. I think that's kind of almost impossible, but I scribbled down a few things from, I guess, sort of listening to the various talks and the conversation now. So this is not really a summary, it's just my scribbling, so please bear with me. I think in no particular order, but kind of the order they happened in. Your do's and don'ts early on, I think that was really interesting, and I guess the carrying on that sharing in terms of what works, what doesn't work, what would you do differently if you were doing it all over again, that kind of thing. I think there's a massive richness that comes from all of the experience here that can help others that are kind of facing the same challenges or going up that curve with less experience. So I think that's really important. Linked to that is the networks. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of surface networks and a lot of sort of behind the scenes networks that all of you tap into in order to make this stuff work. There was something, and I can't quite get the words right, but there was something around it works in practice, does it work in theory, which I think was kind of thinking about that, doing it and then kind of slightly worrying about whether it's working or not after you've done it to a degree, and kind of learning from that doing, which I think is really important. The looking backwards bit I think was really interesting. Several of you, I mentioned it before, were looking at this sort of historical context, whether it was around the repair, kind of the legacy of repair and what was lost, and also speaking to the role of the council in managing buildings and owning buildings, in running things, or kind of getting out of the way and letting things happen. And I think that context, I think, is really important in terms of looking forward, is to kind of maybe take clues from what has been before. And I think also, just finally, the importance of space and kit and stuff. I mean, I think, you've got a lot of passion, a lot of goodwill, and you're able to kind of hustle and get good stuff done. But actually, the spaces where things come together, the places, the buildings, the PA systems, all of that stuff that's needed to make that happen. So that's kind of a wrap up, but it's just sort of my observations, I guess, on some of the common things. So I think that's kind of there's something behind me, I can tell. So so I mentioned there's a really useful slide here with a lot of the upcoming events and initiatives and launches, which many of which have been mentioned tonight. So that's up there now, and it will be coming around and shared